Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
God, that was fun doing that. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Joe Marinucci, President and CEO of Downtown Cleveland Alliance and a proud member of the City Club. It is my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, the 2016 Chairman of the Board of the International Economic Development Council and the President and CEO of the Greater Richmond Partnership, Barry Matherly. The economy has consistently been a topic at the forefront of American politics, especially during election cycles. We all remember the Democratic presidential candidate when Bill Clinton's famous mantra, "It's the economy, stupid," from his 1992 campaign against George H.W. Bush. Nearly 25 years later, not much has changed. According to the Pew Research Center, 84% of the people say the economy is a very important issue to them, while Gallup puts this figure at 86%. While there are many facets to a strong economy, much of our focus today is on business attraction and job creation to support thriving metropolitan regions. How do we create an economic development strategy focused on a strong urban core that provides access and opportunity across all demographic groups? In this context, Mr. Matherly joins us today. He is the 2016 chair of IEDC, a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization serving economic developers with nearly 5,000 members. We wish it was 50,000. IEDC's strategic focus includes globalization, sustainability, entrepreneurship, and economic restructuring. IEDC works with communities and economic development organizations to weave these core topics into economic development initiatives such as community revitalization, business development, and job creation and retention strategies. As a past chair of IEDC, I can attest to the historic leadership that IEDC has brought to economic development at the local and national levels. This fall, by the way, 1,500 economic development professionals will gather here in Cleveland at IEDC's annual conference. At the conference, we'll also celebrate the 90th anniversary of the economic development profession. When IEDC isn't keeping Mr. Matherly busy, he also serves as president and CEO of the Greater Richmond Partnership, an organization dedicated to business attraction and retention in the Greater Richmond area. Previously, Mr. Matherly served as Senior Vice President of Business Development for the Greater Richmond Partnership. He was hired by the Lincoln Economic Association in North Carolina, where he served as Executive Director. He also spent time as the Director of Economic Development for the communities of Goochland and Pulaski, Virginia. Did I get those right? And the Special Projects Manager and Economic Development Assistance Center at Virginia Tech University. Mr. Matherly has a bachelor's degree from James Madison University and master's degree from Virginia Tech University. He is also a graduate of the Economic Development Institute at the University of Oklahoma and a recipient of the Robert B. Cassell Leadership Award. Ladies and gentlemen, and members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please welcome my friend and colleague, Barry Matherly.
Well, good afternoon. You know, it didn't catch me when I first sat down, but this is one heck of a mural over here on the side. I'm going to have to get something like that in my office. I am very pleased to be here today representing the International Economic Development Council as the 2016 chairman of the board and as an economic developer in a city that has been in the forefront of the practice of economic development for a very long time. I am further pleased to be here at the great city of Cleveland, where next month IEDC will host its 2016 annual conference. And Joe mentioned we expect probably one of the largest turnouts ever here in Cleveland, so we're very excited about that. I'd also like to extend my thanks to the City Club Board President, Bob Littman, for the leadership and for inviting me to speak with you today. I'd also like to thank Dan Mouthrop, who gave me a great introduction and a great book on the club that I'm honored to have. and his team here at the City Club for all their hard work in hosting this event. It is an honor and a privilege to be here. Finally, I'd like to I'm usually on the opposite end of this with Joe. Him introducing me was quite an honor. But I'd like to thank Joe Mariucci with the Downtown Cleveland Alliance. I've known Joe for a long time, and he's a very good friend of mine. Also, as Joe mentioned, he is also a past chair of IEDC and a co-chair of the 2016 annual conference. We're also joined by Gary Conley, a past chair and award recipient, and Dick Pogue, who I just got to meet earlier, who is also an award recipient from IEDC. Senator Sherwood Brown will soon also be an IEDC award recipient, and I think this all has a theme with Cleveland winning a lot of awards when it comes to economic development here, as he will receive the Congressional Leadership and Economic Award during our annual conference, where he'll also be providing keynote remarks. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge IEDC President and CEO Jeff Finkel, a man who's been leading our organization and the profession for 30 years. So I know now in my career I'll never make a 30-year mark at this point, and I doubt many people get a chance to do that. And also, in the back of the room, Matt Mullen, who is our IEDC policy guru, a proud Ohioan, and loves everything about Ohio, and is a great tour guide for the last couple days. As mentioned, the International Economic Development Council is a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization serving economic developers. With more than 5,000 members, IEDC is the largest economic development organization in the world. Economic developers promote economic well-being and quality of life in their communities by creating, retaining, and expanding jobs that facilitate growth, enhance wealth, and provide a stable economic base. From public to private, from rural to urban, local to international, IEDC's members are engaged in a full range of economic development opportunities. Given the breadth of economic development work, our members are employed in a wide range of settings, including local, state, and provincial and federal governments, public-private partnerships, chambers of commerce, universities, and a variety of other institutions. When we succeed, our members create jobs, develop vibrant communities, and improve the quality of life for regions. Cleveland is home to some outstanding economic development organizations, including the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, Destination Cleveland, Jumpstart Inc., and Team NEO. Cleveland benefits from economic development professionals also working in the public sector. Mayor Jackson is well advised by Tracy Nichols, also on the IEDC Board of Directors, and her team at City Hall, and County Executive Budish by Ted Carter, Chief Executive Development Officer for the county. The commitment to economic development in Cleveland runs very deep, with organizations like the Cleveland Foundation, the Gunn Foundation, the Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, to name a few, working to amplify the efforts of economic development organizations. Cleveland is a community that gets economic development, from the city to the county and throughout Northeast Ohio. Now, everybody knows 2016 is a very big year, and it's because IEDC is having its 90th anniversary. And it may be because there's an election going on. We can't escape the ads in Richmond, Virginia either. As a fellow swing state, we are inundated with the advertising. In 83 days, this country will make a very important series of choices, because it is easy to forget, perhaps, that the control of Congress is also in the balance. Not to mention, there are 12 gubernatorial elections in 2016, putting governor's mansions in play, state houses, county commissions, council chambers, and so on. But today I'd like to focus primarily on the top of the ticket and suggest from a perspective of economic development some ideas the next president of the United States should consider when forging ahead with their economic development agenda. But before that, a brief assessment of where we've come from and where we are today. The Great Recession decimated many communities as millions lost jobs, homes, and in some cases both. By all reasonable indicators, the economy has recovered and continues to show positive signs of growth. We have 6 years of private sector job growth, an auto industry that has added tens of thousands of jobs, unemployment rate under 5%, hourly earnings up 2.6 in 2016, and 843,000 more manufacturing jobs today than just back in 2010. It has been hard work getting here and not without sacrifice. There is currently cause for optimism, if not celebration, but we must remember that we have much work to do, not just to continue the recovery, but to sustain our growth in the future and create more resilient economies. Consider these insights. The economy would need to add between 7.5 and 10 million jobs just to get back to the pre-2006 employment levels, despite the fact that we're in the midst of the greatest economic expansion since World War II. After recovering from a negative 2.8% growth rate in 2010, the GDP has remained flat comparatively at a disappointing 2.43% in 2014 and 2015. And 93% of US counties have yet to recover to the pre-recession economic levels. And let me say that one again. 93% of all US counties are not back to the pre-recession employment levels. I would propose the following as a broad framework for the next administration to put the country on a stronger, more sustainable path to economic success. Creating a dynamic workforce system that meets the current needs of business and anticipates future needs. Overhauling the nation's infrastructure to ensure a timely and cost-effective flow of goods, services, and people. It's the circulation system of our economy and a connection to markets near and far. Building on the momentum of manufacturing resurgence to ensure American manufacturing is the most advanced, not just in terms of what we build, but how we build it, from advanced techniques to world-class workforce and every step in between. Expanding international opportunities through FDI attraction, it's foreign direct investment, export promotion, and trade agreements that are good for workers, businesses, and the environment. Also, supporting entrepreneurs and small business owners with increased access to capital, common sense regulation, and non-financial resources. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, enacting policies and programs that promote equal economic opportunity, so that those individuals and communities that have yet to recover might share in a brighter future. These are complex and lofty objectives that will require significant resources, financial and political, that are well beyond the scope of what any president can deliver alone. From an economic development perspective, the federal program has roughly 80 agencies and programs spending around $17 billion annually, give or take, that touch on areas that lead or contribute to job growth. When examining which proposals to give close consideration and have scarce resources allocated to them, it is prudent to first take a step back and look at the process. Specifically, what will take place during the transition period between the current and next administration. Both candidates have teams of economic advisors who will help the next president shape an economic agenda. On November 9th, the winter's transition team will begin in earnest. A transition team will begin to immediately assess how best to move out the previous administration and move in the new one. This process will include looking at policies and programs under the current administration that merit being carried over and those that may not. It also includes a massive human resources effort in the form of thousands of political and senior career appointments. The new president will have the responsibility of appointing thousands of people to positions throughout the government to actually run the government. This is an often forgotten aspect of the job of being president. The daily work of the federal government is overseen by an army of assistant secretaries, deputy assistant secretaries, office directors, program managers, many of whom will be learning a new job come January of next year. We've covered the good and the bad of the current economic condition and the complexities of transforming from one administration to the next. Let's now turn to the platform proposals I mentioned in more detail. These 6 items, workforce development, infrastructure, manufacturing, international opportunities, small business and entrepreneurship, and equal economic opportunity have consistently risen to the top of IEDC's policy and research priorities over the last few years. Our Public Policy Advisory Committee is working to prepare the next federal agenda, which is a longer, deeper dive into these issues and will be shared along with transition documents for key federal economic development programs with the next administration. Our Economic Development Research Partners Program, IEDC's in-house think tank, will be releasing a report on economic opportunity during the annual conference right here in Cleveland next month. And that'll be a very exciting moment in the profession. Workforce development is a critical component of economic development. There can be no doubt that a trained workforce is absolutely necessary to sustain local businesses and attract new ones. The federal government is in the midst of overhauling the nation's workforce development program for the first time in more than 20 years. Congress passed the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act in 2014, and the Department of Labor, the lead federal agency on WIOA, as it's referred to, has been in the process of implementing it since then. WIOA took the number of steps in the right direction. In particular, economic developers were pleased to see the inclusion of economic developers on state and local workforce boards, written into the statute, and a requirement at the local and regional level to align workforce plans with regional economic development strategies. It's a forceful acknowledgement of the practical connection between workforce and economic development. The next administration should continue to encourage close collaboration between workforce and economic development professionals and organizations. While WIOA encourages collaboration, it does not always require it, instead using language that presents it as an option. We encourage the execution of the option wherever possible. WIOA further reestablishes federal funding for state-specific initiatives, if those states are meeting the core requirements set forth in the legislation. Every effort should be made to assist states in meeting their core requirements, as the funding for state-specific workforce initiatives is critical. The funding allows governors and local officials to design and implement cutting-edge workforce programs that can address very specific local workforce needs, programs that would almost certainly go unfunded otherwise. It is also important to note that WIOA is authorizing legislation, not appropriating legislation. Congress must act annually to appropriate and implement WIOA, and we encourage the next administration to include funding to authorize levels at their budget requests. Congress and the administration are currently in agreement on restoring 4 full-year Pell Grants, allowing students to access vital aid to continue their education during the summer months. Pell Grants are particularly important for students in career and technical education. Institutions that are working towards certifications and degrees such as Associates in Advanced Manufacturing, training and degrees that are in very high demand currently. Full-year Pell Grants would support faster training and allow higher graduation rates for exactly the type workers our economy needs right now. The next administration should aggressively support full-year Pell Grants as a bipartisan, low-hanging fruit priority in the early days of the administration. Manufacturing is on the rebound in the U.S., but we're still millions of jobs behind where we were before the Great Recession. There is a myriad of reasons why manufacturing got behind, and a myriad of ideas of how to get it back to where it was once before. Overseas labor and energy were cheap, so companies left. The global economy tanked, and the demand for goods plummeted, further deepening the downward spiral of the manufacturing industry. And then, as the smoke began to clear, companies began returning to the U.S., and a new term started appearing in the press, in academic research, and political speeches: reshoring. It seemed like we might actually get it all back, and we may still. Manufacturing has the ability to dramatically impact the well-being of local communities, regions, and entire states. As such, it will remain a major focus of policy and research work for the foreseeable future. The current administration has placed a great deal of emphasis on supporting existing manufacturers, reshoring manufacturers, and the creation of new manufacturers. This is essentially an all-of-the-above approach that we encourage the next administration to adopt. Create environments that support and grow manufacturing through competitive tax policies, robust workforce development strategies, and a culture of innovation. An excellent example of the all-of-the-above approach is the National Network for Manufacturing Initiative, NNMI. NNMI is a program designed to bring together industries, universities, local, state, and federal agencies to spur manufacturing innovation and also to translate it into American jobs. NNMI has so far attracted over 1,000 companies, universities, and nonprofits as partners in this initiative. The federal government has already committed over $600 million to 9 awarded institutes, which has been matched by over $1.2 billion in non-federal funded resources from across industry, academia, and state governments. With multiple innovation hubs already established and many more announced, the millions invested toward the collaborations are already generating benefits to U.S. manufacturers. The very first institute in the network is actually here in Northeast Ohio, about an hour or so east of Cleveland. The National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute, or America Makes, has used the federal investment of $50 million to leverage local, regional, and national resources, advancing 3D printing and additive manufacturing. In only its third year, America Makes is researching ways to accelerate 3D printing, speed, and metals by a factor of 10. It is partnering to provide over 1,000 schools with access to 3D printers and has launched a workforce training program to give over 7,000 workers the fundamentals of 3D printing. The Institute is also attracting investment in November of 2015, when GE announced a $32 million investment to open a 3D printing research facility in the region. The next administration continue to support this initiative, like NNMI, as a common sense move that leverages private sector resources with federal dollars. The strong manufacturing sector will coincide with strong innovation ecosystems, strong workforce systems. There is a third piece to the manufacturing puzzle, though, and it needs immediate and sustained attention from the next administration, and that is infrastructure. There is no debate in Washington that our national infrastructure is in a state of deep disrepair. No one disagrees that a massive, sustained investment is necessary not just to repair and maintain our current infrastructure, but to build new highways, bridges, railways, ports, canals, mass transit, energy grids, and broadband connectivity. Congress has acted in recent years to address parts of the nation's infrastructure. Congress has also passed a mixed bag of key infrastructure legislation in the last few years. While advances have been made in important areas such as environmental reviews, project selection, and long-term authorization bills, the most critical area remains largely unaddressed, and that is funding. The various trust funds responsible for financing the nation's infrastructure, maintenance, and expansion are insufficient at best and frequently insolvent. Accordingly, the top priority of the next administration related to infrastructure must be identifying and implementing a permanent funding stream. Suggestions have ranged from increasing the gas tax, which hasn't been raised since the early 90s, to creating a national infrastructure bank, to leveraging public-private partnerships to construct infrastructure, and many, many more ideas. There is no shortage of ideas out there how to pay for these things. And I won't stand here and try to tell you that one idea is better than the other. But there will need to be, in the next administration and Congress, a need to come together and make some difficult choices for the sake of the country. Success on this issue will be the result of true leadership. Now, international opportunities, including foreign and direct FDI attraction, export promotion, and increased trade, are a leading cause of growth in local economies. The Bureau of Economic Analysis has reported that in 2015, another record-setting year for FDI. So with companies that are majority foreign-owned businesses, created 6.4 million jobs, had $57 billion in R&D funded in this country, and $425 billion in exports. Economic developers and communities, large and small, have begun to look beyond their borders to find new investors and businesses. For some, this has been a standard practice for years, while others have more recently added FDI attraction to their toolkits. What has been clear, though, is that in the wake of the Great Recession, we will need to expand the market for investors and buyers to one on a global scale like we never have before. One of the most significant contributors to these efforts has been Select USA. The U.S. Department of Commerce's Select USA program, the country's investment promotion initiative, was re-energized in 2011 to facilitate and coordinate FDI attraction across the federal government. The data, training, and funding streams available from Select USA and other programs are powerful tools that economic developers can use to attract FDI. Select USA has been essential in capitalizing FDI as a significant source of jobs, downstream spending, tax revenues, and increased clustering efforts. FDI can also bring technical knowledge and international exposure to a community. Recognizing these benefits, governments at the state and local levels are increasingly relying on Select USA to pursue their FDI. My own community has just had the pleasure of hosting Select USA Executive Director Vinay Thumalapalli yesterday. And if you haven't met him, he is a marvelous person, a wonderful speaker, and just very down to earth, and very excited about his belief in the strength of the U.S. economy. We have enjoyed an incredibly strong working relationship with Vinay in this program, and we are hopeful that the next administration will pick someone as dedicated, knowledgeable, and energetic as Vinay has in the past few years. The Select USA program receives no annual appropriations and is not authorized program by statute. Accordingly, its operational costs come from the International Trade Administration's annual appropriation. This is not an ideal operating situation for our nation's investment attraction program, and a far, far cry from what other countries allocate to their investment promotion agencies. Earlier this summer, legislation was introduced in Congress, the Select USA Authorization Act of 2016, that's S3097, that would make the Select USA program permanent and open the possibility for it to receive direct appropriations in the future. Supporting Select USA and this legislation is a top priority for our profession, and we are encouraging the next administration to support it as well. It is worth noting that the program enjoys bipartisan support in Washington and across the country, making the legislation an excellent opportunity for early aisle-crossing action over the next few months after the election. Small business and entrepreneurs are also a critical part of our national economy. In the years since the recovery began, access to affordable capital has remained a top hindrance, in particular for minority and women-owned businesses. While traditional sources, such as those available through the SBA's 504 and 7A programs, remains an option, many have found it difficult to get the approvals and terms they can live with. The next administration must make it a priority to use the resources of the federal government to support small business and entrepreneurs. Luckily, there is one such program already in place that has the potential to do more good. The Small Business Jobs Act of 2010 created the State Small Business Credit Initiative, that's SSBCI, to strengthen state programs that support small business and small manufacturers. SSBCI is designed to help spur new private sector lending or investments in small companies by leveraging the federal support offered by the program. Thanks to SSBCI, small business are able to close the credit gap, making it easier to secure the financing necessary to grow and create jobs in our economy. Administered by the Department of Treasury, SSBCI has made nearly $1.5 billion available to states, municipalities, and territories. The funding has been used for programs to leverage private lending capital to help finance small business manufacturers. These efforts have proven very successful and should be continued. Through April 2016, participating states expended $1.3 billion and spurred more than $6.4 billion in private sector lending and investment. That means they were able to generate $8.15 in private sector lending and investment for every dollar of federal funding. In addition, that helped create and retain 141,000 jobs. I think I'd like to share an excerpt from a draft of a soon-to-be-released report on economic opportunity that I mentioned earlier. For many Americans, the year since the end of the Great Recession has not been kind. The recovery, slow, weak, and uneven, hasn't felt like much of a recovery for many people, and in some cases, for entire communities. Economic opportunity, or rather its absence, has become a national conversation. Today, unlike ever before, people of all ideological stripes, from policy wonks to corporate execs, presidential candidates to bloggers, are debating cycles of poverty, school outcomes, pay, stagnant wages, and a host of other phenomena related to economic opportunity, inclusion, and inequality. Perhaps this is the most challenging matter at hand. More than training programs, roads, trade deals, reshoring, and access to credit combined, because economic opportunity involves all of these things and involves providing them to people and communities most in need. There are a number of proposals that will fall under the umbrella of this topic, and we should look at all of them as we work in the future. As our profession continues to explore our own role in creating more opportunity in these communities we serve, we will surely formulate more concrete positions on this issue. As you can see, the next administration has their work cut out for them, and it almost makes you wonder why anyone would want the job in the first place. The truth is, the federal government plays an active daily role in the success and failures of our local and regional economies. Our profession must continue to engage and perhaps become more engaged with local and state practitioners and partners to promote with a single voice that the challenges are not insurmountable, but they are an immediate need of attention. As we progress towards November 8th and beyond, let us continue the conversation, let us keep talking, and let us keep listening. Before concluding, I'd like to think it would be appropriate to acknowledge a man that played an important role in the lives of Clevelanders, Ohioans, and economic developers throughout the country. George Voinovich recently passed away, and there have been many, many tributes to him. Senator Voinovich dedicated his life to public service and sought office to improve the lives of those he served. IEDC recognized his service and leadership in 2010 by presenting him with the Congressional Leadership and Economic Development Award. It is my hope that whatever candidate wins in November, they will rise to the level worthy of the recognition and an honor that has been bestowed on Senator Voinovich. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for supporting a continued civic dialogue, which on the very important issues facing our country that we need to work together. On behalf of IEDC and its members, thank you in advance also for hosting us next month, when instead of just 4 or 5 of us, we hope to bring 1,500 of us back to Cleveland to learn, to debate, and also to have a good time. Thank you.
Today we are joining a forum with Barry Matherly, the 2016 Chair of the International Economic Development Council and President and CEO of the Greater Richmond Partnership. We are about to begin the audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, or those of you who are joining us via our webcast. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it to @theCityClub, and City Club staff will try to work it into the program. We want to remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point, and actually, by the way, they should be questions. Holding the microphones today are Content Coordinator Teddy Eisenberg and Director of Programming Stephanie Jansky. May we please have the first question?
And let me mention also, I mentioned earlier Jeff Finkel is here. Not only has Jeff been with IEDC 30 years, but he's also been in DC and other positions with the federal government. How long have you lived in DC, Jeff?
About 37 years.
37 years. So as my backup, I figured having someone that lived in DC and actually tolerated it for 37 years would be a good person to help me with the Q&A. So Jeff is joining me on stage.
Going to start out with a question from Twitter. Wayne would like to know whether a countywide sales tax allocated by population would help avoid municipal infighting and shift focus to recruiting new residents.
You know, it's interesting. There are, in Texas, some portions of the sales tax that are dedicated to economic development and used at the local level. There are also, and that is statewide in Texas. It's a statewide option. There are also some communities in other places that on an individual basis have done that. So what I would just say is it is a tool that is being used out there. Texas would be a good example to look at if someone's considering doing that.
Don't take the microphone. I have a question about brownfields. We've seen both state and federal funding been cut quite a bit for brownfields. Cities like Cleveland that have a manufacturing legacy are continually looking for sources to try to return land to productive reuse. Is that part of the platform that you're talking about?
So let me start. In my past as a local economic developer, I have done brownfield projects, and those are extremely difficult projects. And I know that they need a lot of assistance. Brownfields is something that we've worked on in the past. I'm going to let Jeff kind of chime in here in a minute, but just from a past practitioner level, and also being in I come from Richmond, Virginia. We're like 410 years old. There are some brownfields left over after 410 years. As long as the hipsters haven't converted them into apartments these days. But I think that is a key program for land, because one of the big things we run up against in economic development is the need for sites and infrastructure. And the good thing about brownfield sites is the infrastructure is already there and in place, which is a huge cost savings and a huge start. And then typically those sites are in key strategic places in our communities also. So I'm very supportive of those efforts, and I think it's a great that we look at that. What we are trying to touch on here today, and I think manufacturing is where a lot of that brownfield legislation comes in, is we try to just pick one program out of each of those 6 priorities that we were focused on. But as we said, our public policy committee will have a document that is much greater expanded than this as we move through the next couple months. Jeff?
So, Tracy, if I were to answer that in a political way, I would say it's too bad the brownfield program is at EPA, because the Environmental Protection Agency is the third rail of politics in Washington, D.C. anymore. And it has become such a partisan divide that if you support EPA, you are on the wrong side of certain folks. And so EPA is being starved to death for resources in a whole variety of places throughout the agency. And, you know, they're the ones that killed coal, as we all know. I say that with a smile on the back of my head. But they are blamed for many things, and as a result, everything at the agency gets starved for resources. If it was at HUD, if it was at the Department of Commerce, it would probably have sufficient funds that we could be able to manage more brownfield sites around the country.
Barry and Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. I have a question that picks up on a thread that was mentioned yesterday at our forum on Public Square around public transportation. You may have caught wind of there's a big debate about whether or not to actually to let buses through Public Square as the square was designed, or whether to close it off permanently. I don't want you to weigh in on that. What came up, though, was the mixed messages that the city's current decision-making process sends to others about the value of public transportation and a robust public transportation system for a city, for a regional economy, and so forth. you both sit with a 20 to 30,000 foot perspective, and you understand how different regions invest in public transportation and the impact that has. And though I didn't hear it mentioned specifically in the platform proposals that you offered, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about what you know, both of you, from your work about public transportation and its importance in workforce development and in all of these other things that you've laid out.
It touches on several issues. One is in the infrastructure piece, public transportation is a part of our infrastructure platform. I think the other thing is that in the economic equity, where is a kind of a new horizon for us at IEDC, one of the big things that we're dealing with is, do you bring the jobs to people? Do you bring people to the jobs? And there's a lot of debate in the research that we're currently doing. Is one better than the other, or are they both needed to work? Well, and obviously in bringing people to jobs, that is public transportation. That's what makes that work. So if you're a community that does not have the sites or the infrastructure to move the jobs closer to where the workforce, the people in need of jobs are, then you're going to have to find a way to get them to where you've decided as a community those jobs are. And so that becomes very big. I walked out of my hotel and I saw the bus rapid transit line going through downtown. I applaud you for that, because actually we just started last week on the one in Richmond, and that'll be our first bus rapid transit line connecting through the whole city, connecting several universities and major corridors. So at the regional level we're a big believer in the need for that, and bus rapid transit as one of our answers to moving people around. And in our own communities, we're working on several initiatives, and we've done both. We've had success in actually bringing some manufacturers closer in to populations that where we didn't have industrial sites before, so they could walk to work or get an easy commute there. And then we're also working on things like the bus rapid transit to get them to where we already have existing parks.
I'll pass.
Interested in the perspective of development professionals on the double-edged sword of technology jobs. High wages, a lot of sex appeal to them, bringing an Amazon data center. But a data center of 1 acre in size maybe employs 8 people. So you bring in this very large data center, growing up in Collinwood, working in a machine shop when I'm 17. If you had 1 acre of machine shops, there were thousands of jobs, running 3 shifts and so forth. So curious on your perspective and if there's a problem and if there's a solution.
I heard it just recently, someone say that there really is no technology sector because everything uses technology now. So I would imagine even if you had a machine shop these days, that the automation in it would probably only have about 40 or 50 people in the same machine shop, just because of the technology. What we see is, and this is a hard part for economic development, is in the deals we're doing in the manufacturing side, the investment is an all-time high because of the automation, technology, and equipment in those facilities. But the employment is low. So yesterday we actually announced in our region a 400,000 square foot water bottling facility. That'll only need 75 people to run the entire thing. Robots load it on the line, robots pick up the bottles, robots actually load the trucks. And although I guess it's coming, I'm fearful of the Google will probably then drive that truck with a robot out of that facility one day, and there will be no people from the time that it's made to the time that it gets to a destination.
So let me address it from the public policy point of view. I think there are 2 public policy questions we're going to have to ask ourselves in the future. One, as economic developers. In the past, the economic developer has always been rewarded for bringing in higher wage jobs with a lot of benefits. Is that dynamic going to get reversed on us? And are we going to be rewarded for bringing in lower wage jobs where there are more people employed? I'm not sure we've seen communities start to practice that, although I do have one example. The city of Baltimore wanted to be the first city in the country to bring back a television, now this was a few years ago, manufacturing facility because they wanted to have an assembly line with lots of people working on it at low skills. The second policy question that what you said and what Barry emphasized or gave examples to is 10, 20 years ago, are we going to pay people not to work? That becomes the natural extension of this question. If we don't have enough jobs, how do we reward people in a way that we just don't put more and more people into welfare?
Thank you. I'd like to ask about infrastructure. So infrastructure spending traditionally is thought of as constructing new roads, new lines, connecting new places. But one of the challenges that we face in urban core areas is outdated infrastructure, lack of funding for operation and maintenance, and then additional costs from deferred maintenance. So can you talk a little bit about how your proposed programs for infrastructure investment would help address those legacy costs?
So here is my belief of either of the next two presidents, or next president of the two candidates. In the first week almost of the Obama administration, they tackled medical care and new ways of financing insurance, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it. If I had to guess, and I've heard this from a number of Hill staffers, that maybe the first piece of legislation, the first appropriation, the first budgeting that would come out would have to do with infrastructure funding. Our infrastructure is in that bad of a place that it may absorb all momentum out of the first part of the next administration because it has been neglected for such a long time. And now, who knows? If it does happen, you can say you heard it here first. But there's a large belief that that is the first thing that has to be tackled.
Hi, guys. Tying in with David's question a little bit, but would IEC consider, or have they considered fix-it-first policy to go along with the, I applaud you for having infrastructure as one of your 6 primary focuses. Would you consider a fix-it-first focus to go along with that?
Fix it first versus building new. Is that
Right,
what?
right.
Yeah.
Once again, we have not worked out the full policy statement. I know on one of the things that we get into is we've got rural versus urban too. And when you look at the 93% of communities out there, there's a lot of rural communities that need core infrastructure. Part of our infrastructure also includes fiber optics, which are critical for anyone doing business anywhere in the U.S. So I think there's a balance there that we'll have to look at as we kind of move into the policy paper.
Yeah, I mean, the traditional debate, Vince, that you're talking about is, there are a lot of highway companies that want to build new highways, and then the urban infrastructure ends up being badly beaten up over the years, and I'm sure that will be a huge debate in new places like Nevada, California, Arizona, which are still expanding. They're not going to want to fix it first. The Northeast Midwest, where winters are particularly rough on infrastructure, you guys are going to want to fix it first. So it puts us as a national organization in kind of a tough spot. But there's still, you guys probably have more votes than the Sunshine State still, and so you just have to convince your congressional delegation. Yeah, from Kansas City and Northeast, there's still probably a preponderance of congressional delegations. Yeah.
So I think you have a lot of great ideas, and I think you've got a big fight ahead of you from what I can see as we think about what works at the local, regional level. What thoughts have you given to how the federal government and states can align in a better way to support economic development? Pick any of the initiatives, but when I look around, I see all kinds of misalignments now, and I see where that's going to even get more divided as we move forward.
Why don't I pick one and then you pick one?
Okay.
So I think when I mentioned earlier that I was very excited is the Select USA. which is actually in the past in the US, so we were the only industrialized nation without an FDI component at the federal level. So it was thought that every state kind of fending for themselves, and you know, that works to a point. Select USA has been a great effort that works in conjunction with the states, and the states have responded. If you go to the Select USA conference, it is heavily attended by the states, by regional, by local economic developers, because they believe in that program, because they have actually set it up as a service model to the states and localities and regions. So I think that's where they got it right, where they actually have a federal voice out there in Select USA promoting the entire United States, with other countries promoting themselves as a whole. And then it actually not doing the ED work, actually deferring to the states and regions and localities to do the economic work. They're just in a support role to help us. So I think that would be one where a newer program where they really kind of lined it up to be in service instead of kind of top down working together as a partnership.
So before I answer the question, I want to acknowledge three people in the room. Donnie Annone, who just asked the question. Don and I in 1992 worked on writing the transition document for our organization to the then incoming Clinton administration. And it was the two of us and a young intern by the name of Frankie Clogston, who's now a great researcher in Washington. The second person I want to acknowledge is Susan Helper, who just left the U.S. Department of Commerce. When we first got into the work of reshoring, this whole idea of manufacturers moving back to the U.S. after having taken some jobs out, she was advising Senator Sherrod Brown's staff on that whole issue. She was still at Case before she then moved to Washington, and she's been continuing to work in that area and very helpful to organizations like us put our heads around that issue. And I don't know if we recognize our other board member in the room other than Tracy. Michael Taylor with PNC Bank is also on the IEDC board. But in my dreams, Don, I don't dream this way, but I would love to see the federal government and the states, and this is not a board policy, by the way, get to some reasonable notion of what all of these tax incentives are. You know, we see this incentive game sometimes spiraling well out of control as one state bids against another for a number of companies. You know, many of the states do not want to see the federal government play a role, but then other states who are, you know, kind of flat on their back and don't have a lot of tools would love to see the federal government end up in the game. You know, that may be a pipe dream on my part, but it would be nice to not have these wild variances in terms of what we're willing to offer companies as they game us all over the country.
Barry, Jeff, welcome back to Cleveland here. Infrastructure seems to be a topic there that we've been talking about, so I have a question. So a couple of years ago, Atlanta made a decision to move their ballpark 20 miles outside of the urban core, which seems to be the complete opposite of what's happening. But even if they fund this ballpark, you're going to need infrastructure, new infrastructure, you know, in the greenfield. So if you look at repairing some of the old infrastructure and what we need to do, you know, and what they're doing, of course, then they'll go to the state or the federal government to pay for a lot of that. Is that something that what's your comments on that particular case, you know, for this ballpark that was built in 1996 and is going to be demolished?
That's an issue. IEDC for a long time had a conference, If You Build It, Will They Come? The role of convention centers, stadiums, and arenas in economic development. You know, to understand these major league owners and the decisions they make, you'd have to be a much smarter guy than I would to even get your head around that. But that goes against what we've been seeing mostly around the country. Now, football stadiums, who cares? Because they only you only fill them 8 to 12 times a year. You only have, you know, 8 or 9 home games plus The Pope doesn't show up all that often, and the Beatles don't have many reunions, so you can't fill those facilities. Baseball stadiums, hockey, basketball have enough dates that they can be real core to an urban fabric, and the spinover in terms of food and beverage and other expenditures can be quite high. So that, what Atlanta did is kind of contrary to what we're seeing. Baltimore brought theirs central, Washington, D.C. built their central, Washington brought the Caps and the Wizards back downtown. I mean, as you look across the country, most of the decisions have been to bring those facilities that utilize a lot of nights. But Buffalo moved their football facility significantly out of downtown, and that ends up being a big unused space, so that doesn't really hurt a community, in my opinion.
And let me just add to that, I was in San Diego recently, and they have their baseball stadium that they put downtown in a district that has seen phenomenal growth. And the great quote I heard there is, don't think of it as a baseball stadium, think about it as an anchor for a 20-block redevelopment project. And that's how they approached it, and that's how successful that has been there.
Thank you. Today at the City Club, we enjoyed a forum with Barry Matherly, the 2016 Chair of the International Economic Development Council and President and CEO of the Greater Richmond Partnership. The community partner for today's forum is the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, if you haven't figured that out. We greatly value the partnership with the City Club and all of the benefits that the City Club brings to this community. And we greatly appreciate the fact that you're now on Public Square, which is you know, our new outdoor civic platform for dialogue. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Cuyahoga County Department of Development, Duffy & Duffy Cost Segregation, the International Economic Development Council, Playhouse Square Foundation, PNC, and Team NEO. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Barry. We really appreciate you and Jeff's remarks today. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.